go ahead and sign documents that you don't understand, I want to give you a few pointers and a few of the legal details that you should watch out for when it's time to finalize everything. Obviously, you will have to prepare. With everything, preparation is key, and so make sure that you have a copy of the contract sent to you beforehand. You don't want to be in a situation where you show up in person and have to sign something that you've never seen, because you might not have enough time to understand the whole document if it's multiple pages, which typically a rental contract should be. There's two ways this can be done. One would be in person. So either you have the landlord come over and you sign in the apartment together, or you go to them if they're not living at the same place. So for instance, could be a company where you go into their office to sign the contract. And especially in those cases, when it is in person, it's important to have a contract sent to you in advance. The other situation that could happen is that you have the contract signed to you, you sign it and send it back. Either way, make sure you have someone who knows German with you. In person, bring a translator or a German-speaking friend, and ideally even have a lawyer looking over it if you can afford that and want to dot all I's and cross all T's. One question that sometimes comes up is negotiating the contract terms. Typically, there is not much you can do. It's basically take it or leave it. So once you have the contract, you're locked in, and then you have to accept it the way it is. So one more reason to be extra detailed with what you're signing. The correct way to do this is to obviously have a document. Just a handshake agreement, oral agreement is not good. These contracts are made for times of disagreement. That's what a contract is for. So if there's a misunderstanding, both of you can look into the contract, see what details were agreed upon, and you just need to have it in writing. Also, it needs to be signed by hand or electronically. That doesn't matter from a legal standpoint. But sometimes it even happens that a contract is just drafted and one party misses to sign or whatever reason. If that is the case, you can't agree to a fixed term contract. Automatically, the contract will be unlimited terms. You have to know that. If you agree on a handshake basis or have an unsigned document, you agree to move out in 4 months, that's legally not binding, and you have an indefinitive contract that only ends when one party cancels actively. Best practice is to have 2 original contracts, one for you, one for the other party, and both of these copies should be signed. If you don't do the signature in person, then you're doing it via mail, and it's very important that you don't just send it with the regular mail. Spend the extra few bucks, get it in a tracked mail so you know when the other party receives it and you know nothing gets lost. You will also then have proof that the contract was delivered and everything is legally binding. The German term for tracked mail is Einschreiben. You can just go to your local post and they will help you with that. Avoid legal traps. There are some traps, and there are just some details that you want to watch out for. Things that can be confusing if you don't understand them right away, and just a little heads up so you know what you can expect from a contract, what kind of questions are negotiated. Typically, everyone will know what apartment they're renting and how much they're going to pay. That's something that you should find out beforehand if you're even interested in the place, if you can afford it. But then on top of that, there are a few details that come up regularly. A common legal trap is that things are not documented. I mentioned it a little bit earlier. Obviously, contracts are for times of disagreement. If both of you and the landlord get along well, then fine. You can change anything and also get off the contract, do things that are not agreed upon, as long as both of you are fine with that. But in times of disagreement, that's when the document really shows its value, and you both can go back to what actually originally was agreed upon. But not just the contract itself has to be documented, also other things. For instance, if you move into the place and there are damages, make sure that you take pictures of everything. So once you move out, you don't have to pay. The landlord can claim that those damages were caused by you. If you can, get a written statement or at least an email, something that you can show that proves the landlord has recognized these damages weren't done by you. Also for furnished apartments, go over the furniture, make sure if there's any major thing or just something where you're not sure if this is a damage or just a little old piece of furniture or a floor, whatever it is. Just make sure everything's documented and there's no unclarity. This will help both parties in the end. If there's an inventory protocol, don't just sign it. Go over every single item. Make sure there is as many chairs in the apartment as the inventory protocol states. For an unfurnished apartment, the Übergabeprotokoll, the inventory protocol, will be a lot shorter. It might only state the number of keys that were handed to you. But still, a professional landlord will give you an inventory protocol, and you should just make sure that everything that's stated on there you really received. So again, in times when you move out, you know what you got and what you didn't. And if there's any other documents, there really shouldn't be besides the contract and the inventory protocol. Sometimes there's rules of the house or something like that. Details, know what you're signing. If your German is not up to par, then have at least a friend with you or even get a translator. So you're not just signing any documents that can be held against you in the end. One clause that sometimes can be tricky are the repair and renovation duties. This is mostly for unlimited time contracts. If you rent an apartment for time, for half a year or so, typically you won't have to bother with that, and your landlord will take care of all repair and renovations. But for the unlimited time contracts, this is obviously a relevant question. And in German law, there's two different types of repairs. There is one, the renovation cosmetic repairs. This is called Schönheitsreparatur in the contract. So look if you find that clause. Typically, the things that are meant by that, the classic is painting. It could also be something like putting on new wallpaper, things along those lines. Nothing that is necessary for living in the apartment, but things that make the place look nice and comfortable. The standard agreement in regards to cosmetic repairs is that the person moving out has to paint the place and get it to a decent living standard. It has to be of standard quality. So you don't necessarily have the right to a wonderfully, artfully painted place, but also you don't have to accept something that's subpar. Sometimes you can find an agreement with the previous tenant. For instance, they don't have to paint and you paint when you're moving in. And then when you're moving out, you don't have to do it, and the new tenant will do it. But that's something that you should be aware of. Do you have to do these cosmetic repairs? And if you have to do them, do you have to do them moving in, or do you have to do them moving out? Or possibly, is there a certain period so that you have to do it maybe every 2 years or something like that? on top of these cosmetic repairs, there are regular repairs. So that's anything that makes it impossible to stay in the apartment for a long time. So for instance, if the kitchen breaks or if a faucet doesn't work as it should, bathtub, shower, things along those lines. The general rule is you only have to pay for what you break. So with normal use, I had it happen to me that just an old kitchen, for instance, gives up. And just an old stove, it doesn't work anymore. That would be something that the landlord has to fix. But obviously, you have to pay what you break. So for instance, if you want to install a new shower head, and by doing that, you break the shower faucet, that would be something you have to cover out of your own pocket, and it can get quite expensive. That's something that I would recommend you to at least consider, is to get liability insurance. Then that liability insurance will cover you in case you break anything on the apartment. Some landlords might even require you to do that. And it is not really expensive. It will cover you for less than 100 euros per year generally. So about, under 10 euros a month. And then you're safe. You know, if anything breaks, you're covered and you don't have to worry about it. We offer a free setup service. You can just email us at info@expertlauncher.com, and then we can get into the details. So like I mentioned, that's if damage occurs, which was your fault, you have to pay it unless you're covered by liability insurance. If damage happens that wasn't your fault, it's the landlord's obligation to pay. However, some contracts have a exception from this rule for small repairs. So generally, the landlord has to pay for something that breaks without your fault, but he can put in the contract that small repairs under 100 euros are your obligation. So that would be, for instance, the doorknob or the bell, some small thing that goes out. If there's a clause in the contract for small repairs, it could say that you have to take care of these and you won't get reimbursed from the landlord. So one point, the deposit. Everyone talks about how much they're going to pay for rent, but the deposit is sometimes a point that can be lost in the mix, but it's definitely something that shouldn't be, because it can be a good chunk of money that you have to pay up front before you actually get into the apartment. The deposit is a safety for the landlord in case that you damage the apartment or fail to pay rent. And most contracts will require one type of deposit or another. While some private landlords might just accept a transaction into one of their bank accounts, and they will then give you some kind of document, again, document everything, that shows that you actually paid. This is not the best way to go about it. The correct way to set up a deposit is through an deposit account with a local bank. It's called a Kautionskonto. Kaution is the term for deposit in German. And you can go to any local bank and open a deposit account in about 30 minutes. You will need to bring your passport, your rental contract, and then they will open this account. You then pay that money into the deposit account, and your landlord will have the right to hold that money back. The account is still in your name, but you can only get the money back with the written approval of the landlord. So when you move out, you get that approval, you get your money back, and everything is fine. The maximum amount that you have to pay for deposit is 3 months rent. It could be less than that, but 3 months is the maximum that you would have to pay. If it's that high of an amount, you have the right to pay in 3 installments. So for instance, if your rent is 1,000 euros per month and your deposit is 3,000 euros, you can pay 1,000 in the first month, another 1,000 in the second month, and then 1,000 in the third month to make it 3,000. You have to know, once you move out, don't start planning with that money. You will only get that money after a while. This process takes much longer in Germany than it does in other countries. You might get it back immediately, but the landlord can keep the deposit about 3 to 6 months after you move out. The reason for that is that not all damages are visible immediately, and also there's still the utility bill. And the utility bill has to be calculated, for instance, the cost for the housekeeper, the gardener, chimney cleaning, etc. And that can take a while. So don't start planning with that money. It might take a while until you get it back. And if you don't know when that money is coming in, ask your landlord when you're moving out. After 3 to 6 months, you should definitely be a little bit more persistent and follow up regularly so you get your money back. Now, in the area of scams, this is something that's not very common, but I've seen it happen, and that is a non-commercial contract. Only a shady landlord will do that, and if you see it, stay away. The German term is Gewerbemietvertrag, and it's a commercial contract that's only meant for offices. What you want is a rental contract for living space, a Wohnraummietvertrag. The difference between the two is that you are not as much protected in a commercial rental contract. Typically, an office is not as important as your home, obviously. So there's more rules in place. Some shady landlords try to get around and try to sell you with a commercial contract, but that's not a good sign. No reputable person would do something like that, so stay away from that. Another scam that you could run into is that someone offers you an apartment that's too good to be and wants a deposit paid up front. Don't pay anything before you've seen the apartment and the landlord. Just as a warning, use common sense, especially if you rent from an individual landlord. A reputable company might be something different, but especially with individual landlords, be a little bit suspicious, especially if your offer is too good to be true. It normally is. Do a visit in person, and if that is impossible, do a video call. Make sure once you pay that you've seen the apartment, you know it exists, you know the landlord, you have the contract, and yeah, don't get scammed. Use some common sense. I don't want to scare you with this. It doesn't happen to everyone. It's quite rare, but it can happen. So I just want you to be aware. Once your time in the apartment has come to an end and you want to get out, it's important to think about canceling the contract. Obviously, with a fixed term contract, this will end whenever is agreed upon, and you will have to move out on that date. If you want to stay longer in a fixed term contract, you would have to actively renew the contract. The exact opposite is true for the unlimited time contract. With unlimited time contract, you have to actively cancel. Again, going back to a rule, document everything, cancel in writing. Don't do a handshake agreement, have a signed and dated confirmation from the landlord so you know when they received your cancellation notice. This will be important for the period when you're allowed to get out of the contract. If it's not possible to get a dated confirmation, then use registered mail, so at least you have proof, official proof that they received your cancellation notice. The standard is 3 months cancellation period. There could be something different, but if nothing is specified, it's 3 months to the end of the month. This means you can only cancel at the last day of the month. You can't get out on a 7th or an 8th in the middle of the month. Watch out that there's no minimum duration clause. Some contracts will require you to stay in for 1 year, 2 years, or maybe even 4 years. So if you want to leave earlier, you might not be able to get out and then still have to pay for that apartment while you're not even there anymore. Make sure there's no minimum duration clause, so you're not locked in longer than necessary. If push comes to shove and things get really bad, there is the possibility for an immediate cancellation, but this is only under extraordinary circumstances. This is very rare and only for a handful of cases, but this would be a situation where the apartment is inhabitable. For instance, there's a leak in the roof, it rains into your apartment, you notify the landlord, they don't do anything about it, you notify them again, they don't do anything about it, then it's time to get some legal advice, do an immediate cancellation and get out of there. When you're moving out, another topic, as well as moving in, is the cosmetic repairs. Do you have to paint, or will the next tenant moving in do it? Maybe the next tenant is happy to get an apartment and wants to paint it anyway the way they like it, so they might take this burden off your shoulders. Speak with the next tenant and the landlord. That's one of the few things that you can negotiate typically. To give you a better idea of the cancellation times, we're going to look at two different examples. Again, the two rules are for an unlimited time contract that the landlord has to receive cancellation notice until the 3rd business day of the month. And if not specified differently, the cancellation period is 3 months to the end of the month. So for instance, if the landlord receives your cancellation notice on the 2nd of January, that's within the 3 business days, January counts as the 1st month. So then you would have 1, 2, and the 3rd month in March, which means your contract ends on the 31st of March. In the second example, you hand in your cancellation notice a little bit later, on the 8th of January. This means it's not within the 3rd or the 3 first business days of January. So January doesn't count for your cancellation period. You still will have to wait 3 months starting from February, so March and April, and then your contract will end on the 30th of April. Keep that in mind so you can plan when you will get out of your contract. Obviously, if something gets really bad, get some legal help. Little disclaimer, all that I'm presenting here is just a rule of thumb, a good guideline, and it cannot substitute a lawyer, some in-person specific legal advice for your situation. If things get out of hand, definitely contact a lawyer, or if that is too expensive, you can also contract Deutscher Mieterbund or your local Verbraucherzentrale, that's the Better Business Bureau basically, and Renters Association. They will be able to help you for a very small fee, cheaper than a lawyer, and it should give you the assistance you need if things get out of hand. At the end, you can't watch every detail of the contract, but those are 10 points that I would really encourage you to look at, so you know the details about those things, and then you should be covered for most cases that you will encounter.